Welcome to our CEO interview series for the Brave Feminine Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Hamilton, and today I could not be more thrilled to welcome Launa Inman to the conversation. Launa, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
So I am going to briefly step through your bio for anyone who hasn't had the pleasure of coming across you before. And so let me share that Launa currently serves on the Australia Post Board and the Advisory Board for Fantastic Furniture. Launa is also the chair of the Melbourne Fashion Festival and sits on the boards of the not-for-profit Alana and Madeline Foundation and Fitted for Work. She's previously been on several ASX-listed boards, including Commonwealth Bank and Super Retail Group. Launa is a former CEO, Managing Director of three iconic Australian companies, Target Australia, which she ran for 7 years, Billabong International and Officeworks. Lorna's been recognised with the Telstra Australian Businesswoman of the Year Award and the Sir Charles McGrath Award for her contributions to marketing and industry achievements. Welcome again. Incredible career and background. Launa, I always ask my guests, let's just kick off with your story. And if I can say, well, who are you as a human being?
That's a hard one to answer. But what I will tell you a little bit about my background, and I guess you can pick up that I'm not actually born and raised in Australia. In fact, I was born in Zimbabwe, educated there. And then at the age of 21, I had just finished university, and my husband and I moved down to Cape Town. He was going to do an MBA, and I needed to work to put him through. And that's really how I fell into the clothing industry, because I ended up working for a manufacturer which did these beautiful clothes of both ladies' wear and children's wear. And I was running the sample line, which was not the best job, but you know what? It was such a good introduction to understanding clothing and fabrics and that type of thing. And really, it was from there that I moved into retail and discovered the love of my life, which is retail, buying and selling. That's what I love. It doesn't matter whether it's fashion or whether it's computers or whatever. It's something that really appeals to me. And that was the beginning of my career.
Amazing. So, well, let's keep going with that in terms of you ended up here in Australia somehow. How long have you been in Australia for now?
Oh, well, we've been here over 24 years, and best decision we ever made. It was tough getting here, I have to say. We had made the decision that we wanted to leave South Africa all that time ago because of the crime, but we had to really try to get in because they had very strict immigration laws. But I was very fortunate. I eventually got a job, arrived here, and it was a big change for me, Melissa. It was a change for me culturally, even emotionally, because I knew that mentally we had to leave Africa. It wasn't the place for our children to be raised. But part of my heart was there. But I knew it was the right decision. And also, it was very different. I came into a working environment which was a big box retailer, which I'd never really run before. I'd been involved in department stores and specialty stores. And going to Sydney and working with Big W was a fantastic experience. Tough, because I had to learn everything again in the sense of really understanding costs and customers. And I think the thing that was also so interesting is Australia is such a vast country, and the customers are not the same. I mean, what the consumers want in Queensland versus Melbourne, very different, climate's different, but it's even more than that. It's the rural versus the city, those that are more price conscious than others. So it was fantastic. I learned a lot, had the experience of going to work at Walmart in Bentonville in Arkansas, which really made me focus on costs, lower price, watching every penny that a company needs to do. And I know that if I hadn't have had those 3 years learning that, and I found it tough, I would never have been able to have gone into Target and in time take it over and run it successfully as CEO.
So how did that work? So you came to Sydney, were you with Big W and then you went to Arkansas for Walmart? How did that sort of come about?
Well, at that time, Big W very much predicated their vision on being the lowest cost operator, watching everyday low price, watching every penny that was spent. And they had a tie-up with the organization, and one of the ex-CEOs took us on a 3-week tour almost, looking at the stores, really helping us to focus on what their success was. And they have continued to be successful for over 50 years. And those are the learnings that I have never forgotten, never forgotten. And from those 3 years then at Big W, I had the opportunity, I was approached to go to Target. They were really battling at the time. They had lost their way. And I was asked to go and head up all their apparel. And Melissa, that was a big call because we had bought a house in Sydney. We just got established. We'd been there 3 years. And we kind of picked up and moved all over again. But the moment I walked into Target, I just felt an affiliation with it. It was quite interesting. But that was also challenging because within 6 weeks of me arriving, there was a major leadership overhaul. The CEO at the time moved on, plus a lot of his team. I mean, nothing happened to me because I'd only just arrived. And then they brought in a gentleman from America who was brilliant, really good on stores and marketing, and I focused on the product. And 18 months later, we moved from a $32 million loss to a $54 million profit.
Wow.
So it was a fantastic time to be in the transformation of a company.
Can I ask, just for some insight, because I know it'll resonate with people, what do you think were the two or three key things that you did during that time that delivered that transformation?
Do you know what it was? And I have reflected on it many times. Firstly, I spent a lot of time going in and just talking to people and listening. And the interesting thing is Target, it was an organization based in Geelong at that time that had a lot of people working for it for a long time. And it was almost like a family, even though it was a large company. It had 23,000 people. But what they had was this love and passion for the brand. And the interesting thing is, Melissa, they knew why the business had gone off track. They actually knew the solutions. And we did do some research, and the customers very clearly said that they loved the brand, but it had gone off piste. But if they brought it back to what it had been, which was style and, well, really value and quality at that time, they would return. And it was by talking to the team members about what we should be doing now, because they had been there when it had been successful. They had watched it decline, and they were passionate for it to come back and be the brand that it had once been. And it was that. Secondly, I didn't get rid of everyone. I worked with the team. I engaged with them. But I think the big thing is I listened because I really didn't know the business. And then we had a vision and everyone was involved in creating it. But we didn't have all the answers. They did.
How hard was it, arriving here in Australia, no network, no established network at all? How did you sort of go about building a network, or did you need to?
I didn't know anyone. I knew one family. And it was, I cannot tell you how stressful it was. I underestimated it. I mean, I was very focused on getting here. And when we got to Australia, I really didn't know anyone, and I just worked. I mean, the first year, I just worked and worked, and our children went to a school that I didn't even step foot in. Yeah. My husband said that's where our children go to school. It wasn't an ideal situation, but we had no choice. We didn't arrive with much money. And, I look back and it was really challenging, but it was the foundation for me to be able to be successful. And, I met people through business. I didn't really meet them through the children because I was always working. But when we came down to Melbourne, by that stage, I'd met a couple of suppliers. People were very kind, introduced me to other people, and suddenly my network appeared, and I love it. And the interesting thing as well is we were determined that we were going to be Australian. We didn't go and meet a lot of South Africans. My friends are Australian. I feel Australian. And I think that's really important. And I forgot that I even had a Zimbabwean accent. But it's wonderful. We've really integrated into the country, into the whole situation within Melbourne. And my children are Australian. Even though one lives in America now, she's Australian.
Yeah. So, Lorna, when did the idea of first becoming CEO come onto your radar? Was it something that you always aspired to be?
You know, Melissa, I'd always wanted to have a career. I'd always been driven by that. And I think one of the reasons I'd been driven by making sure that I was successful in having a job that I really enjoyed was my father had died when I was 13. And my mom had it quite tough. She was an amazing woman, but she hadn't worked up until my father had died, and she had to go back to work. And I think that it really made it clear to me is that you never know what's around the corner. Mm. And I thought that I needed to ensure that I had something that I could always fall back on. So I was very conscious of going to university, getting my degrees, having a good job. But I also found a career that I loved.
Yes.
So that was really the lucky part. I was very determined in life, but I also loved what I did. So it was never a problem for me to work. And when I'd got to Target, I was credited a lot with having helped turn the organization around, because ladies wear and all of the apparel fell under my jurisdiction, and that's really where the margin comes. As a consequence as well, I went on to win Telstra Businesswoman of the Year and was credited with leading the team to achieve that, because they were impressed by the fact that we did turn it around, but we turned it around with the people that have been in the organization for a long time, as I mentioned. And then I was given the opportunity to go to Wharton and do an executive program for 3 months. And that was my life-changing experience, because I was suddenly now exposed to really smart people coming from different industries, different skills. The lecturers were phenomenal and were constantly challenging us to think outside of the box, but also very global. And I think the most important thing for me is we worked in a group, and at the very end, the group had to give you feedback on what they thought of you. And this was something I really found fascinating. We had to talk to the group before we got the feedback about if an article was being done on us in 10 years' time on Time magazine or something, how would we like it to read? Both career-wise, philanthropic, family, all of these things, how would you like it to read? And as I was thinking about that, I thought, I would love to be a CEO, and I believe I've got the attributes to do it. I'd started to experience success. And then when I listened to the feedback and I had told them my own aspirations, they all said to me, you know what, definitely. We believe you've got the capacity and capabilities to do it. And that really gave me the confidence, because even though my husband would have said it, they love you. Of course, they think you're fabulous. So, and often, when you are having feedback from your direct boss, they don't really give you correct feedback. They don't either tell you the bad things or the real good things. Everyone's always a little bit nervous about offending people. But here I was now hearing clearly what my capabilities were, what I needed to work on. And I was hearing it from people that had no axe to grind, I'm probably never going to see again. And therefore, it was really true and frank feedback. And for me, it was phenomenal. And that's when I made the decision, this is what I was going to do.
Can I ask you about feedback, because you brought that up? I just wonder, was there any feedback that you got along the way that perhaps was hard to hear, but was necessary in terms of your, ultimately your career potential?
Well, that one wasn't in particular. I tell you, when I got some really good feedback was when I was a CEO. And this was something that I've never forgotten. And I constantly mention it to people that I coach. And someone once said to me, you need to stop being labor and be capital.
Mm.
And I said, what do you mean by that? And they said, you are trying to do everything. You need to understand what your strengths are. You're a good CEO. One of the reasons you're there is you've got this ability to have a vision of what could be, but you can't do it all. You need to get people behind you that are competent and able. But secondly, you need to learn to say no. This open door policy is fine, but you have to take control over your own diary, because you need to stop and think what's next and how to be capital. And you know, Melissa, that was probably one of the soundest advice I've ever had. And basically it was a criticism of the fact that I was trying to do everything. I was trying to be the perfect CEO, have knowledge about every single division. It's not possible.
No, absolutely not. So that is brilliant advice. So let's get back then to getting to your first CEO role. So you've been to Wharton, you've had this sort of affirming kind of, we see you in this position. Where did you go from there?
Oh, well, this is the best story ever. And I am forever grateful for a person that really changed the course of my life. And I'll tell you about it. I'd won Businesswoman of the Year. And as a consequence, the Coles Group, which I was part of at the time, were thrilled. They never thought it would occur. And I was asked to go to Western Australia and make a speech, and for Coles supermarkets, because they were owned at that stage by the whole of the number of conglomerations of businesses. Anyway, I was on the plane coming back, and I was sitting next to the lady who basically headed up human relations, people and culture in Coles. And she said to me, so Launa, tell me, are you going to be applying for the Officeworks job that's become available? And I said to her, well, you know, I would love that job, but I believe someone's already got it. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I've heard that 3 different people are all convinced they've got it. And she said, have you ever considered 3 of them can't be CEO? And I said, of course, but I was wondering which one is going to get it. She said, well, what about you? And I said, you know, no one's come and asked me to apply. And with that, she just looked at me and laughed. And she said, you are so naive. Of course they're not going to ask you. You have to demonstrate that you want the role. You have to tell them that you want to put your hat in the ring. She said, you also got to realize that you are really good at what you do. This is a business that's $3 billion, and you're running about 1.7 billion of it in sales, and also making a great deal of profit for them. In many ways, it's harder for them to replace you than to find a CEO.
Absolutely.
And so I said to her, well, what do I do? And she said, when we get back, you are going to immediately phone the group CEO, and you're going to ask to go and speak with him, and you're going to tell him you're interested in applying for the role. So anyway, I got back that night. It was quite late. And I phoned the group CEO, and his name was John Fletcher. And I said, John, I'd love to come in and see you if I could. And he said to me, that's fine, but it's going to have to be 8 o'clock tomorrow morning because I'm leaving for overseas. So I said, fine. Anyway, I couldn't even go to a store because it was late at night. Everything was closed. So I arrived there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I had a cup of tea, and we spoke generally for a few minutes. And then he eventually said to me, so Launa, you know, what can I do for you? And I said, John, I would like to be considered for the role as CEO of Officeworks. And do you know what he said? I wonder when you were going to ask. The job is yours.
Oh, wow.
I mean, can you believe that? And he was waiting for me to demonstrate that I had the desire for it. And, you know, I reflect back so many times, and I think how if I had not gone and asked, I probably wouldn't have got it. And where would I be today? Because it literally changed the course of my life, for my career. It just put me into another bracket. It was incredible.
I have goosebumps listening to you tell that story, and just imagining, as you said, that sort of sliding doors moment if you hadn't done that. When you got into that role then, how did you approach that first? You know, and you've done that several times now in different CEO roles, but your first one, do you remember your first one? Do you remember how that felt?
I do. I remember it. really clearly. And things I did then, I probably would do again, but in a more structured way, because I did it by instinct then, as opposed to really sitting back and thinking about it. Because from the time I got offered the role, I was in the position in about 2 weeks. So I didn't have a lot of time. I hadn't spent much time in stores. So the first thing I did is I really went and walked around the stores on my own, trying to understand the whole essence of the company. And it's a very successful organization, and spoke to store managers and so on. But I wasn't in capacity of a CEO at that stage. But when I first got in, I remember the first day I asked to be taken around and met people. And then I really spent time with the leadership team and just spoke to them about what they did, who they were, what they thought the challenges were for the organization going forward. And the company was doing pretty well, but every company needs to keep, re-involving itself. And I also spent time asking them that if they had identified those problems, what did they believe the solutions were? And I just listened. I did a lot of talk. I didn't do a lot of talking. I let them talk. And one of the things as well, Melissa, I really sat in meetings and observed how they interacted with one another. Something that I have learnt is just because someone has the title doesn't mean they have the power. And someone who doesn't have the title might have all the power and the influence. And I think you have to really be able to understand that, because that's the only way that you can take a company forward and get everyone's buy-in. You need to understand how people operate. Secondly, I spent time with everyone in the various divisions, whether it be supply chain or buying or marketing, trying to understand what their challenges were and whether the organization was very silo-driven. That's often one of the challenges. Of course, I went and spent more time in the stores and talked to customers, because that for me is the essence of everything. What are they looking for? What are they seeking? And every organization has a customer. It doesn't matter what you're in, whether you're buying or selling or whether you're in research, you still have a customer who's going to want to have access to what you've got. So that was important. And then finally, I also talked to people that were not necessarily very senior in the business, but had been in the business a long time. And the reason being, they really understood how things got done, because they had navigated their way successfully to have been in a company for 10 or 15 years. So they had the real understanding of the heartbeat of the company, because what you see is not necessarily what it's all about. So those are the things that I did. And only years later, I went on to read a book about your first 90 days as a CEO.
Yes.
And it was quite interesting. I had done many of those things, but it was more by instinct, because I didn't know the business. I was in a fashion business. Now I was in a business that was about stationery and IT and technology. So I had to ask a lot of questions. But I have gone back to planning my first 90 days every time I've gone into an organization now, because that was such a learning for me.
Amazing. It sounds like you've got a deep value for, long-term tenured employees, as you talk about that as well, in terms of their knowledge.
Well, they have so much knowledge, and people underestimate how those people have an influence in a company. And also one of the things being that they understand the culture. And, when you're trying to change an organization, and I wasn't particularly trying to change Officeworks dramatically, but what I did know is that they needed to evolve. They were very much stationery driven. It was the beginning of the iPod era. It was the beginning of the explosion of technology. We needed to get into it. And interestingly, there was a bit of resistance on that. We also purchased a company that was basically an online business, but you used a telephone and order your supplies, and then they would be shipped to you. But it was the essence of what we are today. And there was a lot of resistance to that. And I had to understand how these people had survived and who was resistant. And they kind of gave me a heads up, not even intentionally, but they enabled me to realize who was key to getting on board, who perhaps needed to move on. And I didn't really change the team dramatically. They were very good already. They were successful. A couple moved on. They didn't want to be part of the organization, but I think they were going to move on anyway because they hadn't got the big role. And it's always challenging for people to stay if they're not having their own aspirations met.
Did you have a favorite CEO role?
My favorite was probably Target. I did love it because I was there for 7 years. I had been involved in the turnaround, then I left and went to Officeworks, and that was a deliberate plan by the bigger organization to let me kind of cut my teeth on something smaller, and we got it to $1 billion at the time I was there. And then I came back to Target, and they did it. It was as a very clever move because the people that were still there had been my colleagues, had been my contemporaries. Now they were reporting to me. And having been out of the business for a while, I could then come back with some gravitas.
Yes.
So I loved it. And it was a business that was evolving as well. And we'd done a great job of really talking about value and quality, but that can be easily replicated. So one of the things we had to focus on now is how we were going to be distinctive, what we were going to be our differentiator. And we added that whole pillar of style. And we always used to talk about style, quality, and value, and looking up at what department stores were doing, but making sure that we were having as good a quality product, as interesting a product, but between 30 and 40% less in price, because of course we didn't offer personalized service and that type of thing. So it was really about how we made our position successful. So for me, it was fabulous because the business was going through huge transformation.
Amazing. So it sounds like you were clear early in your career, or I'm interested as to when it became clear, but what your real strengths are.
Do you know, I've thought about that because I am really good at fashion. I'm good at product and I'm good at retail. And yet I'm not a designer. I can't draw. I've never really even done art. I taught myself a little bit during COVID. But if you were to ask me what I'm really good at, you could show me 10 trends, and I could pick out the 3 fashion trends that are going to work for the particular business that I'm working in, and take those trends and commercialize them. And that is really what I'm very good at. And I remember when they did tests on me, they said, you're very good at scanning the environment. You're very good at getting ideas and then pulling them together into a cohort, which makes it a feasible vision for an organization. And that was what I was really good at in retail. And I was particularly good at fashion because I could look at a garment, and I often wonder whether that was my experience of having run a production line, and I could look at it and see that the fit wasn't right or it didn't have the right cut. But could I have fixed it myself? Absolutely not. But I had this ability to understand what is commercial and how do you make it commercial and how to make a profit. And I still do. And it doesn't matter what it is, whether it be technology or whether it be clothing or whether it was surfwear. I understood the customer. And to me, that's the most important thing.
Amazing. So I want to ask you now then, why don't we have more female CEOs? You know, it's getting a little easier to find them, but it's still very challenging.
I think there's a number of things, and I think the first one stems from not having the confidence to ask. I mean, my story is absolutely typical of many women when you talk to them. And we don't realize that if we don't put ourselves forward, we are actually judged for not doing that. It's not about being humble. They think that you don't have the fire and the desire to have that next role. So that's the first thing. And you know what I also always say to people, ask, because what's the worst that can happen? You've got a 50% chance they're going to say yes or 50% chance they're going to say no. You haven't got it anyway, so you've got nothing to lose.
No.
So I think it is all about confidence. And, I still sometimes, when I have to have a tough conversation or something that I wanted to ask, I still sometimes doubt myself doing it. And then I keep saying, you haven't got it anyway. What have you got to lose? So that's the first thing. I think women need to be confident. I also think that we anticipate that we have to be most effective right from the beginning, and we're intimidated by what the role is. No CEO, when they go into the CEO role for the first time, is that good.
No.
They can't be, because they haven't done it. Of course, they do some smart things during the first year, but I don't believe a CEO is really effective until they've been in the role for 2 years. The first year is all about learning. The second year is about consolidation. And then the third year is about, your way around. You know how to navigate it. You know how to get things done and how to corral everyone to go forward. Then you become really effective. And when I look back, I was in one role for 7 years. My best years were probably 3 to 6 years. It's really good. And then I do think at times CEOs then need to move on, because people kind of get to be able to read you as well. So you sometimes can't be as effective because they know how to manage you just as you have to manage them.
Yes, that's so true. That is such a great comment. How did you, this is a fascinating one for me, because I think, talking about culture and alignment of your executive leadership team, how did you pull that together in the various organisations that you worked in? How important was alignment with your team?
Very, and sometimes I underestimated it. I didn't underestimate it in Officeworks and Target, but I did underestimate it in Billabong. That was undoubtedly my most challenging CEO role, but it was an incredible experience. I mean, I learned things that I never thought I would be able to do. And when I arrived in that organization, it was really in trouble. I didn't realize how severe the problems were. And I think that's one of the things I would always say to people as well: really ensure you do your homework. I had done my due diligence, but I underestimated the challenges that it faced. So that was the first thing. Also, you need to understand the culture. And it's quite interesting. I have such admiration for surfers. I do not really appreciate how fit they have to be, how they are true athletes. But it's an interesting thing. If you are a surfer, it's almost like being part of a tribe. And you can be a merchant banker walking along the beach with your surfboard under your arm, or you could be someone who lives in a caravan and just moves around as a nomad who surfs, and you will instantly have an affinity. And it was very interesting. I underestimated that. I didn't realize this bond that surfers have. And in fact, many of them have it as an action sport, because not only was it Billabong, there was also skateboarding brands and various other labels that they had bought. And I think that was, for me, really difficult. And there was also a lot of challenges, because they did not want a woman running Billabong, and I was running it worldwide. I was the first woman in the world to ever run a surf brand. And also, I did not surf.
Yes.
So they had this feeling that I could not understand them. And there was an element of that was true. And I had to really get to know it, and to go to surfing competitions and understand that these people didn't just do it for fun. It was a lifestyle, and they were incredibly fit and healthy, and they were out there every single morning before coming into work. They'd be on the wave. I didn't really understand that initially, but once I did, it was much better. But I had to learn that rather than them learning about me. I was coming from this very corporate environment, and yet people were coming to work and, shorts and a T-shirt, and sometimes wandering around the office with no shoes on. I did have to draw the line at that. That was a health and safety issue.
What do you, because you're now, for a long time now, you've been involved in boards, what do you look for when you think about future CEO appointments or succession? What do you think about, and what do you think matters the most?
I think today the CEO of the past is very different of what CEO is today. And the reason I say that is when I think about, even before I became a CEO, and at the time as I was starting to come through and get that role, they tended to be very big personalities. And I say they, mainly they tended to be men, but they were people that were quite bold. They had big personas, fairly daring and that type of thing, but they didn't necessarily have the common touch. And when I say that, I mean one of the biggest challenges now for a CEO is their ability to manage up, which is the board, but also engage with all stakeholders. And dealing, if you're an ASX, having to deal with fund managers and that type of thing is extremely challenging. They demand that you be ethical and all those things, but they also are demanding constant return on capital invested. And for many of the things that they talk about, in the end, it is all about profit. And I mean, we've seen that where there's been at times scandals on organizations. Fund managers sometimes still accept it in the short term because they have to give the organization time to find a replacement so that the share price doesn't collapse or the profits don't go down. So one has to understand that. They also have to be able to really, a CEO has to be able to go into an organization and talk to people and find out what is really happening there. And I look at very successful CEOs, and I think that today many of them have come up through the organization. So they're smart and they can't be hoodwinked, because there's always that layer of resistance where people say, yes, we absolutely believe in change, but we don't need to change. And or even if they do nod, they walk out the meeting and promptly ignore what you've said. And or they come back with excuses as to why it can't be done. When you've had someone that's come through the business, and even if it's not that exact business, but have been in a similar business, they know the levers that need to be pulled. They know where people can hide profits or where they can have resistance. And I think that is what makes a CEO successful. So it's humble, but it's much more than that. It's really having this ability to engage right across the organization and all stakeholders and the environment. But they also have to have confidence in their decisions, because they will at times make bad decisions, and they've got to be able to say, okay, it's not right, change it and move on. And I always remember one of the CEOs at Coles when I was running Target. He was very good. He employed some people that he was very positive about, but after about 9 months to a year, it appeared that they weren't quite what he had anticipated and they weren't performing. He was very good at making that hard decision. And he would graciously exit them and find another person and move on. Because I think a lot of CEOs dally in making those hard calls. And all too often, they make them too late. And I remember once saying to a CEO, if you have doubts, you need to make that decision quickly. Because if you don't make the decision, you're losing credibility. That person's team already know they're not effective. They know it before you do. And if you don't seem to take action, they will think that you are weak.
I asked a room full of CEOs that very question. I was talking to them about how to unlock talent in their organisation, broadly speaking, and the focus was on females. But I actually asked them, do you know what it's like to be led by your team?
Interesting. Well, I think you do need to listen to them, but you also have to be careful that you're not being manipulated. Because everyone has agendas, and you've got to try and you're not going to change that. And everyone has an ego, and you want people to have an ego. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a drive and want to be in the very business that you're in, because people are passionate about it. But you need to moderate it, and you need to have a common goal. And that is the success of the organization. And everyone has a part to play. They come up through different paths. They come up through different roles and routes to get to there, because we all have to take a different journey. But you need to listen to them. and then be confident enough in yourself to say, I hear it, I'm going to go with that, or I hear it, but I still believe what I'm doing is right.
I want to come back just briefly to the comment you made earlier about that really led to you getting your first CEO role, but the comment about you're hard to replace in your current role. What should someone do if they're sitting in that position right now? And I hear people get that feedback a lot, or they don't, but there's a subtle message there about you're harder to replace in your current role. What should they do?
The most important thing is make sure they have a successor.
Yeah.
That is the number one thing. And, you know, the interesting thing is that people that are often very good at their job, they want more, but at the same time, they're insecure. So they get nervous about having people beneath them that they think could actually usurp them. And they have to be confident enough that they are good enough to move up and therefore have that person step into their role. And I've watched it. I've watched CEOs when I have praised their colleagues who report to them. And it's quite interesting. I'll say, well, you know, I did this and I did that to assist them. And it's almost like you've forgotten to praise me. And I was part and parcel of their success. Of course they are. And I recognize that. But there's always a little bit of insecurity. All CEOs have an ego and they're a little insecure. I had it as well. We all have it. It's how you manage it. And therefore, I think that get your successor. And that successor might not even be the right person to put straight into your role. But if you've demonstrated they've got options, that immediately shows that you are thinking of what's right for the organization, but it also demonstrates that you want to move up and you appreciate that your role is critical and that there should be someone to take it over.
That one sentence has got so many words of wisdom for people. So pause, go back and replay that, guys, because there's so much. One comment there from Launa. Launa, I would love to ask you the final question, as tempted as I am to go on for hours, because I literally have hundreds more questions. But the final question, what does brave feminine leadership mean to you? And do you think it needs to change?
I believe that each and every one of us have our own brave feminine leadership. But my guidance to everyone who wants to succeed is be true to yourself and understand what your own style is. Understand, and when I say style, I mean even your own personality and strengths, but even your dress style. And be true to it and be who you are. And I'll tell you why I say that. And it was really, really interesting. I had some very wise man give me some guidance once. I was talking about when I first came to Australia, I did find it very difficult to integrate in the sense that things that were of importance to them, I didn't necessarily have the same excitement. For instance, AFL, I now love it, but I'd never even heard of it before. I came from Africa, it was all about rugby. So I was different. The days when I came, everyone drank Chardonnay, but I love sparkling wine. I love champagne, but I couldn't, in those days it was sparkling wine. So what I did is I started drinking Chardonnay because I wanted to be like them. But you shouldn't do that because this one gentleman, he was a psychologist, and I was sitting next to him at a dinner table, and we were just talking about the differences of cultures when you come into a new country. And I said, in some ways, I lost a bit of my confidence in the beginning. And he said to me, you know what? Never do that. He said, you have to understand, you were appointed to this role. You came all the way from South Africa to take up this position because you had something unique. And it wasn't just because you were good at the job. You have a style. What I see is a well-spoken, confident woman. I said, well, I don't always feel like that. He said, that doesn't matter. Just fake it. Know what you are, hold your head up high, and be true to yourself. And I thought, you know what? He's absolutely right. And from that day, I went back to drinking sparkling wine. Because I never did like Chardonnay.
Even though that feels like a good point and a normal point to finish the conversation, you said something then that sparked a question I have to ask. Really senior executive, really senior female executive in a very large global organisation has always had an absolute deep love of fashion. and expresses herself through fashion. And along with being incredibly high performing, winning awards, global recognition for delivering sales outcomes and a whole range of things, had her own little Instagram profile where she would post the outfit of the day. And the advice was that perhaps didn't match her role as an executive in the organisation. Can I ask your perspective on that, heading up the fashion festival and things like that?
Look, I think people should have their own style, but I would say one thing, I probably wouldn't post it a great deal. I think one of the things that I've learned as a CEO is you do not want to have too high a profile. And I don't post on Facebook, I don't post on Instagram, and I don't have a high social media profile in that way. And the reason I say that is there is that tall poppy syndrome.
Yes.
And people come at you, people that are actually not that relevant, but they can be very malicious. And as tough as we think we are, it can be very disconcerting. And all I can say to people when you are attacked on social media, and boy, I got attacked when I was running Billabong. I was constantly in the press writing about, how poor the company was performing, which it was, but I mean, I had taken over a very challenging business. The thing I eventually realized is that the people that were criticizing me, and I was on social media, I wasn't, but people were making comments, they weren't people that I would ask for advice. So why should I take on board their criticism? I wouldn't even ask them for advice. Only people I would ask for advice are people I respect and would like their opinion, or I'm trying to learn something. And I would certainly take their criticism and seriously think about it. But these people, I don't even know. Why would I take their criticism and then allow it to affect my persona and my well-being? And that's why I say I think you have to be careful, because you've got to be strong on it, and perhaps tone it down. Not tone down her dress sense, but just turn down that type of thing of your social media. You have to handle it with care, because there is a tall poppy syndrome.
Thank you so much for that fascinating insight, Launa. Thank you for joining me today. I'm so thrilled to have you as part of the series.
Well, thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed it. All right. Thank you, Melissa.